So, a few logistical issues. This Quest quiz, which is not due today, it's actually due by Monday night, is not something we're going to do in class. It's something you do online. I would say outside of class, but of course, if you got a laptop here, you could potentially do it in class. One of you, has organized a Facebook group. We put the link up here. This is unofficial. I do not have a Facebook page. I do not intend to get a Facebook page. So that means you're on your own on that one, which of course may be better off than with my help anyway. Last, for those of you not registered for the class that have been waiting, that got on the waiting list, that got on my pink sheet, actually a different pink sheet, today is your day to get in. Monday too, I guess, but anyway, if you're in class, come on down at the end of lecture and then I will sign this ad form. So, last time we had a lamp demonstration, right? I sat here and showed that if I touched a lamp, the intensity would go up and it would go off, etc. So I could cycle through this lamp going off and on by touching it. We made several guesses as to how the mechanism might be working, and we tested them. Then we ran out of time. So what I want you to do at this point is to put this into the scientific method framework. And I don't think we got very far last time with it. If I asked you to do it last time and you did it good. But basically, what I want you to do is, for the goal of understanding how the lamp works, figure out what the models were, the data, evaluation, and revision, whether they were present and what they are. So how far did we get on that last time? Did we have time for you to actually go that far? So I see one person nodding and a few people yawning. What? Okay, but I didn't put up any questions, poll everywhere questions. If you were at 10 o'clock, I got further in that lecture than I did in this one. Okay, so that's where we were. So now what I want you to do is kind of think about that again. And so we're going to start basic, right? Do you have something filled in for every scientific method element in this template? So that's going to be the first question. And so what we have here is which scientific method element is missing from the lamp demo? You have the choice of 4 or none. So you can respond with your phone. Somehow, I need to modify this so you can also respond with, oh, maybe I can do that. Aren't I clever? So it'll keep recording your responses, but we got almost 50. So we'll... So the majority of you is torn between either they're all present or we're missing revision. And interestingly, the previous class also split on those two. Let's move to the next question. So now we're going to actually ask you to identify what in the demonstration corresponds to which elements. So we'll start with models. Okay, so which part of that demo that we observed corresponds to models for the goal of understanding how the lamp works. And you have 5 choices, and it's going to be the same 5 choices for all the questions. So, and I think they'll be in the same order. The lamp behavior, whether it went off or on when it was bumped, burned, etc. That's your choice 1. Our decision to reject or abandon a possible mechanism when the lamp behavior was not what it should have been was choice 2. Our attempt to test another model when we had rejected its predecessor, 3. 4, the list of possible mechanisms by which the lamp works, I guess that's 4. And 5, the fact that none of the proposed mechanisms work. So among those, since I didn't give you the option for none, choose what you think corresponds to models. So majority, a strong majority, is picking the list of possible mechanisms by which the lamp works. I'll leave it at that. We'll talk about this later, but when there's such a strong majority, there's no point in asking you to, well, I guess there would be if you were wrong. Okay, so you got it right. Go to the next one, and I guess by process of elimination, you'll be able to get them all. Which corresponds to data? So you have the same options as before. Okay, again, not much disagreement. So data, the behavior when it was bumped, burned, etc. is correct. And we have 2 more options. Now evaluation. Little bit of disagreement here. So evaluation, most of you are on have it right, but it's essentially what we decide about the fate of a model based on data. And so now, unfortunately, because I didn't give you enough options here, revision. This was the one hang up in terms of about half the class split over this. So revision means getting rid of one model and moving on to another one. Okay, so how many people got at least 3 of the 4 right? And how many people, before I even put up the questions, in their notes had written it down correctly and had it figured out? So almost no one. Well, I mean, part of that is multiple choice questions kind of lead us. So we could perhaps use more exercise in figuring things out de novo. If anyone has an idea how to do that in class, let me know. But that's something we can work on. Okay, we will now go to, I think I better. So I'm going to give something of a lecture, part of a lecture, and then we're coming back to some other questions. But I guess we'll leave that there. So there's a figure that unites or relates these different elements of the scientific method that I think helps one sort out how things fit together and how the scientific method works. The goal, as I'll mention in a minute, the goal is the driver of everything. Whatever our goal is, that's the basis on which we measure all progress. It's a basis for deciding whether a model is correct or not. Model can be fine for one goal and crap for another. So goal leads us to come up with models that are a way of achieving the goal. We get some data, and we combine the two in this process of evaluation. There are two basic outcomes that can happen in evaluation. We might decide the model should be rejected. And then we begin a search for other models, and of course, reality is we might have several we're considering at once, but we propose a new model, and we go back in to the cycle from this direction. We start the process over. And we may use the old data to test the new model, that's fine. But the other possibility is that we look at the data and decide the model's okay, we accept the model, but we don't quit there because no data set's so complete that we're absolutely confident of things. And so we get more data and go back into the cycle that way. And that word is more. So that's a simple version of how these things fit together. I'm going to make some points about the scientific method that elaborate on this, but by and large, we can accept the model, we get more data, we might go into the cycle again and decide, oops, that's, with these new data, we got to reject the model, we come up with a new model, and so we can go through this in, all different combinations. And that's kind of the reality of how it works. Now, I just want to offer a warning here that I have greatly stylized this. In normal problems, there are many layers to these elements. And one of the challenges you'll face with sorting out models is you can have, models at multiple levels, and so they're all legitimate models, they're all critical to the whole, but sort of figuring out how things fit together, the hierarchy, the layers can complicate it for you. So now I want to make some general points about the scientific method. This is a general figure of it. And by the way, this is little more than trial and error, right? This is, you do this stuff all the time, just like with the lamp demonstration, right? You're out there trying to fix something, and it's like, okay, that wire is disconnected, so you get in there and you connect that wire and you see if it works. If you're writing a computer program, it's the same thing. It's like, why didn't this thing compile? Or why didn't it give the output that I know it should have given on some trial data set? You go back in, you think, okay, it's because I put a semicolon there and it should have been a colon or something else. You modify it, you try it again, and it works, and then you go through the process again. You're used to doing this. You automatically do it. You've grown up since you were 3. This is kind of what we do automatically. But there are certain things that we also do automatically that we shouldn't do. And so that's why we're going to spend a semester talking about the scientific method. So general points about the scientific method. I actually have 3, but there'll be explanations under each of them. So data, which by the way means the same thing as observations, which means the same thing as evidence. We can use those words interchangeably. All mean the same thing. This is always the basis for judging a model. Evidence is paramount in the scientific method, meaning the most important thing. Science does not entertain models that lack supporting evidence. So it doesn't, now this is a contrast to math, right? There's no such thing as evidence in math. There's proofs, etc. But in science, you're looking at evidence. The evidence doesn't fit, or you can't obtain it for that particular model, you don't pay any attention to it. The next point's a bit long, so I'm going to start a new page with it. So the second point, acceptance does not mean that a model is correct. Right, going back to this figure, we accept something, we're going to get more data, look at it, and through time we might finally decide, okay, it's time to reject that model and we got to come up with a new one. So the model may always be rejected in the future when we get more data. So we just accept that. That's the way it is. Uncertainty about a model is okay. In fact, it is typical. In fact, there are always multiple models consistent with or compatible with any data set. And by the way, together this means we cannot prove a model. So if you see a statement that says, well, we proved this model, you know that's wrong. I just mean all of these points together, right? That if there are multiple models compatible with any data set, if we can always, it's always possible that a model may be rejected in the future. I just mean that all these points are supporting the fact that we cannot prove a model. So you can choose any one of them, actually. But remember, if you see the word prove a model, a statement saying we prove this model, then it's not a good option on an exam. And the basis of progress in science is continual improvement of models. In other words, we're rejecting old models, or at least refining old models and replacing them with better ones. The last point that will come up really strongly in the next part of the course, which is on model, is that the goal is the driver against which everything is judged. So just remember that in terms of whether a model's good or bad or accepted or whatnot, it all depends on the goal. And you can have, the moment you change the goal, you may be throwing everything out the window from what it was with the previous goal.
Is the word in between
Oh, which? Yeah, so I do some shortcuts here. Which, that's which. and a W with a slash is with. Okay, so now let's ask ourselves how various institutions stack up to whether they satisfy the scientific method. We have this set of criteria, right? There got to be models, data evaluation, revision. And we'll talk about a few institutions. There are going to be more in the book, but I think if we just go through a couple of them, you'll get the idea. How do various institutions match? Oops, the word institutions should be there. Let's start with a criminal trial. And I will give you the goal. And more broadly, by the way, we can consider the criminal justice system, but the goal of a trial is to decide accountability for a crime. What I want you to do is spend the next couple of minutes, put it in your notes, talk to someone, and ask, or try and answer rather, which elements of a trial and more broadly, I guess, the criminal justice system satisfy these four elements. Right? So think about that for a minute. Try and write it down. Struggle with it to say, okay, what are the models here that we're using in the trial, etc. So you got a few minutes to think about that and chat about it. Someone want to take a stab at what evaluation is? What part of a trial constitutes evaluation for the goal I gave? So the jury is the vehicle for the evaluation. What's the actual evaluation? The verdict. What would be the data in a trial? Yep. Okay, good. Evidence and testimony. Now, what are the biggest level models in a trial? Okay, so I don't know if you heard him, but it's basically without prejudice to gender. The defendant, I'll do that better. Defendant did it or didn't. Now, what would constitute or what constitutes revision? So, a new trial by which you'd have to appeal. Okay, good. I don't know how many of you got that by yourself, but that's pretty decent. I don't think I need to write this. Oh, maybe I should put it in the notes for people watching this. So, defendant did crime or not. Data is evidence and testimony. Evaluation is a verdict, and the revision would be a new trial. Now let's ask ourselves, so that we can say a trial kind of fits the scientific method. What are violations of strict adherence to scientific method principles? that you can think of. So if we were to, I'll call on you in a minute. If we were to think about how, if we applied, if we were to go at this at a criminal trial the same way we go after cures for cancer or, vaccine development, what would differ in the way we go about deciding someone's guilt or innocent? You still want to say something? Well, I'll let you go.
You can't try someone twice, so once you have the verdict, you can't get more data and then
Okay, so what is that a violation of? Which step? You're correct, but the date, so she's pointed out you cannot be tried, if you're acquitted, you can't be tried for the same crime. So it's a violation of revision, because in revision, you'd be going back each time to say, okay, well, last time we decided the person was innocent, but now we're going back through our cycle with this picture, if I can find it, right? Our previous model was that if a person was innocent, we get more data, and now we could come out the other way. So it's a violation of the revision step, which is, well, actually, I guess this loop. So revision, and that's one way in which it's violated. You cannot try someone acquitted, but retrials are difficult to get. They're very difficult to get. So that's a violation, not in an absolute sense, but in at least a quantitative sense. Many of you have heard about, undoubtedly, people being exonerated by DNA evidence. They were convicted at a time when DNA evidence wasn't available. The evidence from the trial was saved, surprisingly enough, for decades. And they went back in, tested with DNA, and found out, ooh, this person couldn't have committed the crime after all. And the person goes free. That's certainly a triumph of our criminal justice system, but Texas stood out about 15 years ago. Many prosecutors in the state signed a letter to, I think it was the Justice Department in DC, saying, enough is enough. Let's quit going back and looking at old evidence, okay? Let's quit retesting old evidence, which of course is, was an attempt to completely shut down this process, and the Justice Department didn't go along with it. But nonetheless, it is very difficult to get a retrial. So that doesn't fit. There's one other respect in which the way trials go can violate the scientific method. So yes, people can lie, and I guess that's yet another one, right? So that's true. Unfortunately, data and science can be false too. So I don't know quite how to handle that. You're right, but I don't know how to pigeonhole it. So not all data. So this is related, but this has to do with data in trials, and data can be suppressed, legally suppressed is one form of violation, and I can give you a good example of that. So this has to do with data some evidence can be suppressed. Many of you have probably heard of the yogurt shop murders, right? Sensational, terrible crime in Austin back in the 80s. Nothing happened for a while, and they tried some people who were in the high school with the same girls at the time, and they got convictions out of it the first time around. At the time, they had DNA evidence, at least partial DNA evidence, that some of the girls had been raped or had sex. They checked, my understanding is they checked the boyfriends, didn't match they did not match the defendants. That evidence was suppressed in the original trial. I think one of the main reasons it's not gone back to trial is because they know that they won't be able to suppress it this time around. So So evidence can be suppressed. On top of it, the jury is totally free to ignore the evidence. Right? If the jury decides they don't like the defendant, they can, just decide to pay no attention to the evidence. So there's a case of Charlie Chaplin. So you've heard the name, right? Silent movie star in that, was sued for paternity back in the early 1900s. The genetic evidence said he wasn't the father. The jury ignored it and said he was the father. I'll do one other example, which is astrology. So, does astrology match the scientific method? Astrology is not astronomy. They sound alike, but they're kind of different. Right? Astrology is horoscopes and predicting the future, psychics, things like that. So there are goals. And the goals are in some sense, forecast your future. Say this is a good month for you to do such and such, or lecture will be a disaster tomorrow, something of that sort. There are models which are actual rules for making the forecasts. I mean, there are books on, here's what to look at, and here are the, when someone's born under these conditions, etc. Here are properties of how their life is going to go. If we were to apply the scientific method to astrology, what else would be included? What else would be in part of astrology? How would we go about doing science on astrology? So you'd take these forecasts, these predictions, and you'd actually ask how well do they fit? Absolutely. And then based on that, what would you do next? See if it's valid, and then of course there'll be some discrepancy. So then again, so you're right. But now what would be the next step in the scientific method if you kept applying it to astrology? You would revise the rules for making the forecast. Absolutely. So, but this does not happen. There's no attempt to test the forecasts or revise the rules. So it doesn't fit very well. I don't know if there's still a link, at least last year there was a link in the book to some Dawkins confronting some astrologer and really challenging this astrologer to say, give me some concrete predictions, etc., about your discipline in the astrology. The astrologer completely backs off on it, saying, well, that's not what our discipline's about. Okay, I'm going to make 3 more points. And I'll give you a shortcut to identifying good versus bad or no science. A is the use of evidence paramount. I already said this was a characteristic. Yes, if good science. B is their continual revision and turnover. And again, yes, if it's good science. So if you see those two characteristics, you got an idea that science is being ruthlessly applied to the discipline, to the institution. If either or both are absent, definitely not. But it's a shortcut, right? And so technically you still have to go in and ask, okay, are all the elements present, etc. But this is a pretty good first pass. Okay, two other points. There are types of problems that lie outside the accepted domain of science. There are things we don't want to use science for, and this actually is a value judgment on my part, but, and these are problems that involve proscribing behavior. Oops. Or values. Okay, this does not belong in science. And historically, there have been societies that, did this. Some you've heard of social Darwinism. So what's social Darwinism? It ties to survival of the fittest, but so survival of the fittest is kind of a statement for what natural selection is about. So it's connected to social Darwinism.
The adaptation of survival of the fittest is social doctrine. It's basically you take that notion and you can apply it to things like euthanasia, genetic manipulation.
So it's the justification of social practices based on how you see nature working. So, what? Yeah, well, so yes, it's happened, and there are different forms of social Darwinism, right? The Muller, who was so the early eugenics movement, which was before Nazism, started with goals of just encouraging certain types of people in society to reproduce, etc. And I suppose that was a form of social Darwinism too. Muller, by the way, worked in the building right up the hill there, and he's best known for discovering that X-rays cause genetic damage. Along with this, we also want to say or emphasize that public policy should not be dictated by science. So in essence, what I'm doing here is telling you my philosophy about this, that the scientific method is useful for certain things, but you don't want to use it to decide your values, your behavior, and so on. And when I say public policy should not be, the idea is you have science and then you have social, political, and legal consequences of alternative decisions. Right, and so these are two boxes here. And what you do is you put them together to come up with a policy. Right, so you decide, well, okay, putting chemicals into our rivers or pouring radioactivity down the drain has certain undesirable effects, but we got to balance, benefit to the society versus cost, etc. And so we want to use science to inform our judgments, but not dictate them. So that's a point I want to make there, and I don't know whether I'll ask you that, but it's kind of, I want to clarify where I think science belongs. And then the last point is there are times when we cannot use or apply the scientific method. So there are cases, there are models for which we cannot get data, at least at the time. Probably the best example I can think of that'd be tangible to you is up until the 60s, we had no idea what the far side of the moon looked like, right? Because when the moon orbits and rotates at the same time, so by the time it makes one complete path around the Earth, it's also made one complete spin, so we never actually see the far side of the moon. Could have made up all kinds of things about it. There was no way of testing it until we actually sent satellites or people up around the moon. There are also models for which we cannot interpret data, and I have some examples of that. Is a good one. This, by the way, for some reason, I used to go to DC about 3 times a year, and it seemed like the DC paper was absolutely obsessed with pet psychics. So there'd be articles in there, and basically there is a career out there for some people talking to animals and telling you what the animals are feeling, like your pets, etc. Your dog, cat, maybe your iguana, and so most of what they're telling you about that animal is completely untestable. You have no way of knowing whether they're making it up. In fact, there's one of the articles I've collected that's kind of tongue-in-cheek about the whole process, and apparently you can call a pet psychic up on the phone, and the pet psychic will tell you how your animal's feeling without ever seeing it, without ever being in the same state. So I'm not saying they don't know what they're doing. I'm sure they do in one sense, but you have there's no scientific way of knowing whether your pet is feeling one way or another, and so this is that part of what they're doing is unfalsifiable.